Ashley Wallace wakes up in a hospital bed. She doesn't remember how she got there. The last thing she remembers is her mother handing her a drink. Something she's never done before in 20 years. Then nothing. Just white ceiling tiles and a nurse asking if she knows her own name. The doctors tell her she almost didn't make it. 17 hours unconscious. If her sister had found her even a few minutes later, this story would be ending right here. Then they tell her something else. Something that just didn't make sense yet. They found a note next to her bed. In her own handwriting, apparently. A confession. Saying she was responsible for what happened to her father and her stepfather. Except Ashley never wrote that note. She wasn't responsible for any of it. She was 12 years old when her father passed. So who wrote a confession and signed her name to it while she was lying there, unconscious, fighting to stay alive? To answer that, we need to go back, way back, because this story didn't start in the hospital room. It started almost 20 years ago earlier in a quiet little town in upstate New York with a woman who was very, very good at looking completely ordinary. Ashley was born in 1987 in Clay, New York, just outside Syracuse. Her parents, Stacy and Michael Wallace, had met a few years earlier. Stacy was just 17 at the time. Young love, small town, the whole thing. They fell in love. 4 years after Ashley was born, her little sister Bree came along. Now, here's a detail that matters later. Michael was closer with Bree. There was a bit of favoritism there. That left Ashley feeling a little on the outside. So who did she turn to instead? Her mom. Stacy and Ashley became inseparable. Not just mother and daughter, but best friends. The kind where you tell each other everything. No secrets. Hold on to that. Because that bond, that complete, unquestioning trust, is exactly what Stacy would eventually use against her. Money was tight in the Wallace household. Michael worked nights as a mechanic. Stacy worked dispatch, the kind of job where you send help every day for those in need. And like a lot of marriages that start young, things between them started to drift. By the time Ashley was a kid, the marriage was basically over, in every way except officially. Then something happened that none of them saw coming. Right at the end of 1999, Michael Wallace started feeling unwell. It didn't come all at once. He was unsteady on his feet, coughing, his face looked swollen. His family kept telling him to go see a doctor. Something is wrong here. But he never got the chance. In early 2000, Michael Wallace passed away at home. He was 37-year-old. Ashley was 12. Doctors told the family it was a heart issue. And at 37, that is unusual, but not impossible. There was no obvious reason to question it. But Michael's sister did question it. She asked for a full examination of the cause. and Stacy said no. She told the family she trusted the doctors, said it wasn't necessary, said it was time to grieve and move on. Now at that time, nobody thought much of the refusal. Stacy was the grieving wife. Of course, she wanted it to be over. But here's what nobody knew yet. That refusal wasn't about grief. It was about making sure nobody looked too closely. Michael was buried. Stacy collected on his insurance policy $55,000. And life, on the surface, moved on. What nobody realized was that Stacy Castor had just gotten away with something. And the fact she gotten away with it so easily, that was a problem. Because she was about to do it again. 3 years later, 2003, Stacy met a man named David Castor. He ran an air conditioning company, practical, hardworking, good reputation. He'd been married before and had a son from that relationship. He and Stacy got together, married, and she even went to work for him as his office manager. To everyone around them, it looked like a fresh start and normal life. But behind the scenes, something was already happening that nobody could see. In August 2005, just 2 years into the marriage, Stacy called the sheriff's office, said David had locked himself in the bedroom after an argument, said she hadn't heard from him in over a day, said she thought that he might be struggling emotionally. She waited 2 full days before making that call. Think about that. When the deputy kicked the door open, David was gone. A container of antifreeze on the nightstand. A glass of bright green liquid beside the bed. And Stacy, standing in the doorway, screaming that he wasn't gone. He wasn't gone. The first ruling was that David had taken his own life. Case closed. But one detective couldn't let it go. And what he found when he kept looking would unravel everything. Here's where it gets interesting. David had no history of emotional struggles, no warning signs, no prior incidents. Nothing in his background suggested this. There were physical details that just didn't add up. His fingerprints were not on that glass. They were not on the antifreeze container. But Stacy's were. On the glass that was supposedly used in a self-inflicted incident. In the kitchen trash, they found something else. A kitchen baster. With David's DNA on the tip and the traces of antifreeze. The theory that formed was this. David had been given antifreeze in his drinks, possibly over several days. As it worked through his system and he became too weak to resist, the baster was used to force more of it into him directly. Then the scene was arranged to make it look like something it wasn't. Therefore, investigators made 2 decisions. They placed Stacy under surveillance, and they started watching something else. The graves of both her husbands who, at Stacy's own request, had been buried right next to each other. Their reasoning was simple. If she genuinely loved these men, she would visit. She never came. Not once. Therefore, they made a third decision. One that would crack this case wide open. They went back to Michael. Investigators applied to have Michael Wallace's remains examined. And what the lab found in his preserved tissue stopped everyone in their tracks. The same substance, antifreeze, in Michael Wallace's system. He hadn't passed from a heart issue. He'd been deliberately harmed. 5 years earlier, same method, same woman. There's a quote from the county sheriff that I kept coming back to. He said, if Michael had been cremated, or if David had just not passed, we would have never known we had a case. Let that sink in. 2 people gone, both cases nearly invisible. If one thing had been different, just one, Stacy Castor might have lived her entire life without ever being suspected of anything. But investigators now had everything they needed to connect the dots. 2 husbands, same substance, 1 woman, linking them both. At that exact moment, Stacy realized they were closing. Therefore, she made a decision, one so extreme, so cold, that even knowing everything she'd already done, it's almost impossible to comprehend. She decided to use her own daughter to get out of it. September 2007. Ashley's first day of college. She's 20 years old, nervous, excited, new chapter of her life. And then investigators show up at her school and tell her the truth about her father. Ashley is devastated, but she doesn't fall apart alone. She calls her mother, because her mother is her best friend. Stacy tells her to come home. Let's have a drink. Let's talk about this together. Ashley goes. Of course she goes. She has no reason not to. That first night, Stacy makes her a drink. Something she's genuinely never done before in 20 years of being Ashley's mother. It tastes off. Nasty, Ashley would later say. But she drinks it because her mother handed it to her. The next day, Stacy invites her back. Another drink. Ashley hesitates because it tastes wrong again, but she drinks it. 17 hours later, Bree finds her unconscious in bed. Doctors later confirmed a few minutes later, and Ashley would not have made it. And while Ashley was lying there, unconscious, while Bree was racing for help, someone placed a note next to her body. A confession, saying Ashley was responsible for both her father's and her stepfather's passing. Stacy grabbed that note the moment the paramedics walked in and handed it straight to them herself. When Ashley woke up, she had no memory of that note. She didn't recall writing it. She wasn't responsible for anything. She was the target, and she had walked in straight to it because she trusted her mother completely. But here's what Stacy didn't count on. Ashley survived, and investigators were about to find something on Stacy's computer that she could never explain away. Investigators searched Stacy's computer, and sitting right there were multiple drafts of that exact note, rewritten, revised, and the timestamps on those drafts created while Ashley was sitting in class. She physically could not have written it. There is more. Police had wire stamps running. In one recording, you can hear typing sounds in the background. He's on the phone with a friend, while Stacy's on the phone with a friend. Prosecutors argued there were sounds of her drafting that note, working on the document she planned to place beside her daughter's unconscious body. But the detail that sealed it, the smallest thing, but the most damning, was the spelling. Throughout the note, the word antifreeze was misspelled anti-free 4 separate times. In an earlier police interview, Stacy had said anti-free herself, cut herself off mid-word, claimed she meant to say something else. Same mistake, same person. Therefore, in 2007, Stacy Castor was arrested, responsible for David's passing, attempted harm to Ashley, forgery of that note. She said she was innocent. But investigators had been building this case for 2 years, and when the trial began, what they laid out in that courtroom left very little room for doubt. February 2009, Onondaga County Court, 4 weeks long. Prosecutors laid out everything: the fingerprints, the baster, the lab results, the insurance money, the altered will that cut David's son out of his own father's estate, the computer drafts, the timestamps, the misspelling. They also explained the science. Antifreeze leaves a permanent trace in the body through calcium oxalate crystal formation in the kidneys. Those crystals were found in David. They were found in Michael. Same substance, same result. Both cases now connected beyond any reasonable doubt. And then Ashley took the stand. 22-year-old, sitting in a courtroom looking at the woman who raised her, who had been her best friend her entire life, who had then tried to end that life, sign her name to crimes she did not commit. She told the jury exactly what happened: the drink that tasted wrong, the trust she never once questioned. She said, "I would have done anything for her, but she tried to kill me instead." Stacy took the stand too, denied everything, tried to suggest that Ashley, who was a child when her father passed, was somehow behind all of it. The jury didn't buy a word of it. February 5th, 2009. Guilty Guilty. Guilty. She was sentenced to over 51 years. Effectively, she would be in her late 80s before any possibility of parole. For Stacy Castor, it was a life sentence. At sentencing, Ashley stood up and spoke directly to her mother. And what she said, I want you to actually hear this, because it was one of the most honest things I've ever heard anyone say in a courtroom. She said she never knew what hate felt like until now. That she hated her mother and loved her at the same time, and that confused her more than anything. She said she wished her mom would just say sorry for everything. And then she looked at her and said goodbye. As hard as you tried, I survived, and I will survive, because now I'm surrounded by people that love me. I'm going to do good things in this world. Stacy never apologized, not at sentencing, not in the prison interviews she gave afterwards, not ever. She maintained she was innocent until the very end. She said Ashley had brought it on herself. Bree, Ashley's sister, is the one who found her unconscious and called for help. Never spoke to her mother again either. She said losing her mother was hard, but she was relieved when the verdict came down. We all know she's guilty, she said. Stacy Castor passed in her cell on June 11th, a heart issue, confirmed by the medical examiner. No foul play, no other explanation. She was 48 years old. She passed the same way she had told the world her first husband went. There is one more detail worth leaving you with. Stacy's own father, Jerry Daniels, passed away in February 2002, shortly after she visited him in the hospital for a minor lung complaint. She was the executor of his estate. No charges were ever filed. Nothing was ever proven. I'll let you sit with that one yourself. Out of everything in this case, Ashley is the one who stays with me. Not the evidence, not the courtroom details. Ashley, a daughter who lost her father at 12 years old, trusted her mother through all of it, and then found out that the trust she's been giving has been used against her the whole time. The person she used to call first when the world fell apart was the same person who caused it to fall apart. She survived. She said she'd go on and do good things. I really hope she has. Sources for this case are linked in the description. Court records, trial coverage, all public. I'll see you in the next one.